It's your Locked On Flyers podcast for Wednesday, January 11th. Your daily dose of Flyers news, analysis, and high quality content that is really excited actually about this home and home against the Washington Capitals.
A good tester.
Yes, indeed. We will talk about that and get your mailbag questions answered on today's show.
Your Locked On Flyers, your daily podcast on the Philadelphia Flyers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, once again. I am Rachel Donner. You can find me on Twitter at rmiriam. I'm here with the lovely and talented Russ Cohen, who is on Twitter at Sportsology. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. You can follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at Locked On Flyers. That is where you will keep up to date with our episodes and Flyers news. You can also email the show at lockedonflyers@gmail if you want your questions answered like we are going to do today. Locked On Flyers is free and available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Odyssey, wherever you are listening right now. So subscribe. You'll get all of our episodes here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Plus, if you want to see our smiling faces, you can subscribe over at YouTube as well. Russ, all quiet on the Western Front, as they say. Nothing really out of
No.
Flyers land yesterday. So we turn our attention to tonight's matchup, the first of a home and home with the Washington Capitals. And, obviously the biggest news for the Capitals is the recent return of Tom Wilson and Nick Backstrom to their lineup.
Yeah, I mean, Nick Backstrom's really trying to do something nobody's been able to do, and it's come back from that hip resurfacing injury. Guys have come back, but they haven't stayed in the game long after that. And we'll see. Like, I'm not going to judge him this early on. I'm going to give
Right.
him a while, but still having him in the lineup is an emotional lift for sure. Tom Wilson is an interesting one because we'll see if he came back a little too soon. And because I know somebody had told me he was experiencing pain just a few weeks ago. Maybe it was you. I don't remember who it was. But we'll see. We'll see. That's another big addition, and it's an addition that if all of a sudden the Flyers do want to go rogue and start fighting, well, you're gonna have to face Tom Wilson now. So maybe rethink that.
Yeah, I'm intrigued to see what he's going to do on that side of his game with the injury. And is he going to just want to, play it safe for a little bit and try and not get involved?
Tom Wilson play it safe.
I know.
I don't
Well,
think so.
stranger things have happened in this game. But interestingly, in the return of Backstrom and Wilson on Sunday versus Columbus, Capitals only had 19 shots on goal the entire game. It's their fewest of the season. They did win the game, but it was a 1-0 shutout of Columbus. So it's intriguing to see, what their recovery process will be like and what their actual impact will be in the game in Philly to start that home and home. The Caps have been resting since then on Sunday. The Flyers played Monday. So both are rested, but the Caps have one extra day.
I could hear Laviolette saying that last game was too effing casual, and I could hear him telling them to just take a lot of shots on net.
Yeah, I can hear that as well. And definitely a different kind of approach than Torts to coaching.
Yes.
But intense nonetheless,
Oh
as
yeah.
we recall from our days of having Lavi behind the bench. We did see the Caps on December 7th. And since then, so, a little over a month, the Caps have been playing really well. They have the third highest point percentage in the NHL behind Boston and Carolina, 11-2-2 in that time frame. Obviously the Flyers have improved a little bit more recently, but don't have that kind of a stretch, even remotely this season.
No.
So there's a clear differential there. Also in that stretch, the Caps have had the 7th highest penalty kill. The Flyers are 19th, the 12th highest power play. So kind of mid-pack, but the Flyers are 28th, and we know about the Flyers power play
It
there.
could be
There's an
29 by the time that
I know.
that game starts. Who knows?
I know. So the Flyers are down over 10% on the power play to the Caps.
It's a lot. I mean, look, the Flyers generally play the Caps well. I mean, I think it'll be close for a while. It's one of those things where with Alex Ovechkin, if he's not having a great game, don't give him a reason to have a great game. Don't start hitting him or hitting his teammates out of the blue and get him fired up, because I've seen it happen. And then all of a sudden he sort of wakes up and, has like 2 goals. You got to watch out for that. You do have to watch out for, again, them getting shorthanded chances on the penalty kill. They're a team that can do that. Darcy Kemper has been way better than people want to admit. I mean, again, if you want to say he's a okay goalie that won a Stanley Cup, that's fine, but he's had a really fine season and he's had 4 shutouts. So,
Right.
again, you don't want to take him lightly because he can lull you into, that kind of game. And again, coming off the game that the Flyers just had, they're a Jekyll and Hyde team. It wouldn't shock me if all of a sudden they're starting to struggle for scoring. So it's going to be a different kind of game. Even though they did face a high-powered team, this is a high-powered team with veterans. The Sabres don't have a lot of veterans, and that's the difference here.
Yeah, it is a big difference here. I think because of the return of Backstrom and of Tom Wilson, that first game they had didn't go exactly well, and it takes a while to reintegrate guys back into the lineup,
Sure.
when you've had things stable for a while. But obviously those guys you're gonna want to put back in, and after that, disappointing performance from an offensive perspective, they shuffled the lines at practice yesterday a little bit, and, Lars Eller is on the wing now. That's
Mm,
new. He had been at 3C, but they moved him up to the second line with Backstrom and Oshie because they think that offensive combination is gonna work a little better. So, no guarantees on what we're gonna actually see in the game so far, but in terms of what practice they put together, that is an interesting thing. And, they had done a little experiment with Strome at wing on Sunday. He's now back to center because that did not work out well, which is not shocking to me
no.
in any way, shape, or form. But also, Sonny Milano is up on that top line with Kuznetsov and Ovechkin.
Yeah, Milano's done well for them, like 19 points in 30 games, 7 goals, something like that. Really good season for him, really good addition for them. He understands when he sees guys like Mantha and Abe Kubel getting scratched that he's going to have to keep performing to stay in this lineup. But I think he's up to the task, and it also improves their team speed because he's very speedy. And again, they got a lot of guys who can dangle. They got guys who could skate and hit like Oshie. Uh, you know, it's a hard team to handle. Now, it's not unbeatable. If you can get in the crease against them, that's good. They don't have Carlson, so they don't quite have the puck handling that they normally would from the back end. That's good.
Right.
So, there are things. Do I expect the exact same effort that they gave against Buffalo? Probably not, because I think Buffalo got stunned a little early and it took them a while to kind of get their game. And then the second period, we saw that they started to sort of take over it. And then clearly Sam Merson had something to say about that. I don't know who's going to be in net for the Flyers in this one. I'm not counting Urson out just because of the way Tortorella has handled them. So either way, it's going to be one of these games where the Flyers do really have to be mindful of not going too deep with their defensemen, because these guys will not only take it back the other way, but these guys will bury them. Buffalo didn't really bury their chances yesterday, but these guys will.
Yeah, I think in terms of the defensive side of things, that is where Washington is a little bit on the weaker side. To your point,
Yes.
with Carlson out, um, Trevor Van Riemsdyk is on their top pairing now,
Wow.
which
Wow.
I would not have guess that would
No.
ever happen. The last time the Flyers played the Caps, JVR was out, so now we get to see them actually up against each other, so that'll be fun to see. As far as the goaltending, I think it's gonna be an interesting game, from the coaches up until the game itself in terms of who's gonna play in net, because I would suppose that each of these teams is gonna play the starter and the backup once in the home and
Yes.
home, but which game are we gonna see each, and are we gonna see starter versus starter and backup versus backup, or is it gonna mix up depending on, last minute decisions from the coaches?
Yeah, I mean, Lindgren's had a really good year too, so they don't lose a lot. They've upgraded a lot in net compared to like the results they had last year. So they could win with either goalie. My feeling is that they'll go with Kemper because they'll try and,
Right.
win this first game and, have their best guy in there. That's just my feeling.
Yeah, and they could play Charlie Lindgren at home over the
Yes.
weekend, which would make more sense,
Yeah.
I think, for the Caps. So, if I were the Flyers, I would just put Carter Hart in, and then,
Yeah, I
if
would
you wanna
too.
play Erson again, have that be on the road.
Yeah, I would be fine with that, but again, I want to see how the handling of this is going to go.
Yeah, it'll be a fun one, though, and especially since we'll get to play them twice in a row, the second game should get a little scrappy
Oh yeah, there'll
over
be
the
some hate
weekend.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, so looking forward to that. All right, we have a whole bunch of your mailbag questions, and we are going to get to them coming up next.
Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. From football, football to college football season, basketball to soccer, esports, and of course the NHL, we've got you covered on BetOnline.net. And if you love sports podcasts like ours, you can find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. Bet online, where the game starts.
Make sure you check out Locked On NHL Prospects. It's a daily show covering the next generation of hockey superstars leading up to the NHL draft. Plus, they've got rankings and top prospect comparisons for every team available wherever you get your podcasts. Russ, these questions are good. There was a lot of consternation in Flyers land about the Ivan Provorov situation and trade deadline, and we're facing the Caps tonight. So there's a lot of good questions around that as well. And I want to start off with a question about tonight's matchup from Rob via email. He had a kind of a two-part question here. He wants to know why Ovi seems to always get a pass and why no players lay big hits on him. Why wouldn't a team's game plan be to have Risto or somebody put some body on him? And seems like he gets the old man treatment.
Well, all right. So he might be old in your eyes, but when Gordie Howe was old, he still would elbow you in the face. And that's the thing about Ovi. You go take him out or try and take him out, and if you don't finish the job, he's coming after you, and it's going to
Yep.
hurt. Ovi could lay the punishment, so that's a big reason why.
Yeah, he's a little sneaky with that
Yes.
sometimes, but he is very good at it. And he's also just so tremendous at puck protection
Yeah.
that he is gonna figure out a way to muscle you off him
Hmm.
and protect the puck at the same time. Like, he's just a phenomenal player, and he can do all of that, still to this day, even at a, advanced age that is younger than me. So, I think that, I think he can handle himself just fine in that, and like you said, he'll just burn you on his shot
Oh
or a
yeah.
move to get around you. So, I think that's really what it is. And the second part of Rob's question is about the power play. And this kind of changes the structure of the power play. This question: would it be so terrible to have a player simply shadow him on the PK and take him out of the mix? It would just change the rest of the PK to a 4-on-3 rather than a 5-on-4.
So by shadowing him, does that mean you're going to try and block his shot? I would like to see
Or
you
just
do it.
be on him at the dot.
Yeah, I mean, sure, you could do that, but if you do that, then you're leaving Backstrom or Oshie or any of those guys open. So if you do that the whole
Right.
power play, you're playing a man short, and he'll still burn you that way. He may not score, but they could still burn you that way. So you're already a man short. Now you're like a man and a half short. So I'm not sure it's a good strategy.
Right, and essentially, you would have to put your strongest guy up against him when you
Right.
need that person to be covering, multiple other people
Yeah,
on the
that's why you
power
play the
play.
box because you're
Right.
covering for an extra person out, so you're covering an area.
Yeah, I think, when the Caps are trying to get set up on the power play, that's when you try to get him out of his office, so to speak, and not give him permission to get there. But then, like, once they're set up and he's there, you just kinda gotta play the box
Yeah, yeah.
and see what you can do. All right, A-dubs wants to know or says, "There's never a good time to trade a number 1 minute eater," referring to Provorov. That's what separates good GMs from Chuck Fletcher. Should you get an outsized return and grow the team via a trade with Provorov?
Well, I mean, okay, so let's take the Rangers as an example. Ryan McDonough decided at one point that he wanted to be traded, and he got traded. Where did he go? He went to Tampa. What did they do? They won a cup. Was he a big part of it? Yeah, he was a big part of it. He was like a missing piece. So, how often does a team trade a number one and do better afterwards? Not very often. So that's what you have to be careful of. Now, I'm not saying Provorov is at the level of McDonough, but he is at a certain level, and you have to be very certain that what you're doing is replaceable, whether with young talent or what you got in the trade and what you got in the draft pick and who you're going to draft. Like you've got to have a real plan, because just saying that you're going to do it and replace the guy may not work out.
Right, and is that counter to your plan of, playing the game right according to Torts and in
Right.
terms of building an identity and in terms of developing the younger players correctly?
Hmm.
Like, so if you don't have a guy like Provorov there and it's one more young guy in the lineup, like who's doing the teaching? Who's doing like the covering when the young guys make the mistakes, you
There's
know?
not that many guys left at that point.
Right, exactly, and so that's why I think, of course you entertain trade options, you always entertain trade options, you look at what you can get, but to me, if you're gonna trade them, it should be closer to the deadline because you want more games, under the Flyers' belt for the season with a more stable defensive structure.
Yeah, that's true too.
All right, other than Provi, who else will or should be on the trading block at deadline?
JVR, Justin Braun, Nick Sealer. Um, I mean, I hear all this talk about Kevin Hayes, even at a 50% eat, which I'm not sure it's worth it for the Flyers to do that. If you're going to eat 50% of his deal to get somebody, you better be getting somebody that's, very valuable, top six valuable for doing that. So you want to say Kevin Hayes, fine, but I think that's a pipe dream to see
Right.
that happen. Might as well put Provorov in there because it's obviously they're going to put him in there, and I think that's mostly it at the moment. Sure, so, something could happen where a team offers a great package for a player that you weren't expecting to trade, and then that could happen. But those are the guys mostly for me.
Yeah, I think so too. And, much like the Justin Braun trade last year, I mean, I wonder if he drops down to a fourth this year. We got a
Yeah, probably
third,
a
I think,
fourth,
for him. So
and it
he'll
may not
drop
even
down
be
to
in
a
this draft. That's the thing.
right, right, which, want more picks in this draft.
Yeah.
But I think Sealer is also a fourth right
Yep.
now. And yeah, I think, Provi, if you can get the right deal, and JVR are your top two guys to
Yes.
try and make a deal on. That is for sure. Kind of related to what I said before, this is an interesting question. Will the Flyers start transactions earlier this year than, opposed to right before the deadline?
I mean, I think they'll try, but a lot of teams are so close to the cap, they may have to wait till the deadline or a day before, 2 days before the deadline, because it's just more time has then whittled off a player's contract, and that's the best time for them to add that money, even if another team's eating 50%. So I think they'll try, but I don't know how successful they'll be early on before the deadline.
Yeah, I don't think so either. And if you think about, what Chuck Fletcher should do or what he will do, and this is again assuming Chuck Fletcher is the guy, which I think at this point we don't know any different than that.
Right.
But I think that he, based on his signings, he signed a couple of guys too early before truly testing the market on them last year. He could, take an early deal because he thinks it'll be the best he can get, and that won't be the case because he wouldn't have waited until the trade
Right.
deadline.
Right.
But I think that's the mistake that I and maybe a bunch of Flyers fans are worried about, that he just doesn't have a good sense of timing on when these deals should be
That's
made to get
fair. I
the
mean,
most out of them.
we've seen some issues with that.
Yeah, I think that is the big issue for me, that, sometimes he has the right idea, but the execution is bad in terms of what the deal is and the timing of it, and, he's willing to pay people for stuff way too often,
Yeah.
and sometimes you just eat it and keep the player rather than doing that too many times to kinda give yourself a reputation like that.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Okay, we've got a few more questions in ye old mailbag, and we will get to those coming up next. We got a interesting one from David Weigert on Twitter, and he wants to know if it's possible that the Flyers could make a late season playoff push, or is it a wash?
No, I think it's a wash. I think you're going to see some moments where they look better, and then you're going to see other moments when they don't, and they're not going to. I mean, even a team like the Islanders, I think, is going to struggle to try and make the playoffs. So if they're going to be struggling, where are the Flyers? So I don't think they're going to be there, and then especially at the deadline when they trade assets, that's when they'll drop.
Exactly. I think that'll be the big difference, is that, they could continue winning, a few extra games than maybe you thought they might up until the trade deadline. And then once they sell off, they're just not going to have the lineup. I mean, unless they got some crazy good player back,
Yeah.
but I just don't see a circumstance where that's happening because, in a perfect world, they're getting draft picks and
Hmm.
prospects for the deals that they're making right now to build toward a future in a rebuild. Yes, a rebuild.
Mm, it's nice to dream.
Yes. This is an excellent question as well. If you're Dave Scott, how do you sell keeping the Chuck Fletcher around during trade deadline and the draft this year?
Uh he's not going to try and sell keeping Chuck Fletcher around. He's just going to keep him around. As far as the end of the year, I don't think he's going to try and sell anybody on Chuck Fletcher. So I think I think he'll be ambiguous at the end of the season, and then I think at some point we'll get a hey, there's a meeting like in July that there's been a change in the front office or whatever, and it'll be like a little bit of a surprise, and we'll go down there, and I think that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, I can see that happening, where he does handle the trade deadline, but then, they decide to let him go at the beginning of the off season. But to me, the two are so inextricably linked, right? The trade deadline and the draft, in terms of if you are really going to do an overhaul of this team and build something different moving forward, and build something with a whole different character to it, you need to have the same strategy for
You do.
those 2 things, and so to me, the only way that that kinda works is if Danny Briere has more power than we think he does at the trade deadline, and he's the one that they put in place, right? It can't be an outside person who wants to come in and put their own stamp on things.
Right. I think based on the guys they have, and since when you're at a draft table, everybody's there, I still think Chuck Fletcher is going to be the figurehead at the draft table.
Yeah, hopefully he'll have been failed up to team president by then, and somebody else is actually doing the strategy.
But if you think about it from an optics standpoint, GMs
Oh,
are used to
totally.
talking to him. If it's Danny Briere's in charge and Chuck isn't there, they're not probably getting as many calls as they normally would. Because the one thing
Could
Chuck
be.
has been able to do is at least trade for draft picks.
That is true. That is very true. All right, this is related. Will John Tortorella stay if the team is bad after next season?
This is a tough one because I've kind of gone over this in my mind, and we've seen where, like in Vancouver, where he just, they kind of called it early. In Columbus, I think he probably stayed a year longer than I thought he might. Stayed a decent length with the Rangers, but I don't think he came here to rebuild. And I think it would be fair to say, if he were honest, that this year didn't go as planned and was harder than planned. So if next year is similar to this year and they only see slight improvement, I think they're going to, have a discussion. I do, because Torts would probably want to find out then what the real direction of the team is. So I'm torn, but I think it's a possibility he could go, and it's probably more likely that he stays. But I don't know if if he would stay past his contract. That's a whole other thing too, because again,
Well, yeah.
it
It's a
really
4-year
will.
deal, right?
It's a 4-year deal, so, you know, we'll have to see after this season where things sort of shake out, and then next season's a real key. It really is.
I totally agree. I'm also of two minds here because I think that you're absolutely right with everything you just said, and that, he's not gonna wanna go through a full rebuild. But I also, listened to him where he said, "This is the last job I'm gonna take,"
Right.
and he wants to go out on a good note. I mean, I feel like he has that in him, that he just, he wants to prove that he could put this team together, come hell or high water, and go out as a coach on a high note before he goes to hang out with the dogs for the rest of his life. And I
And the
just think
horses.
that, and the horses, and I just think that that could be something that's a factor in his decision making. Now, he could change his mind and take a different job. I'm not saying that's impossible, but if this truly is the last head coaching job he's gonna take, I think he'll wanna have some success by the end of it.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
All right, that's the end of our mailbag segment. Thank you so much for your questions. The Flyers fun thing today, I've been trying to get this in for a couple of days now, but we just haven't had time to work it in, so we're doing it today. Uh, Cutter Gauthier, after World Juniors, of course, went back to Boston College. And I'm not sure everybody's aware, but they had another outdoor game at Fenway.
I think they had
Uh,
2. I think they might have had,
yeah.
yeah.
So this one was between UMass and Boston College, and
Yeah.
he scored a goal in this game, and it was a nice one at that.
It was the way he brought it along the wall and kind of shot it from a fair distance. It's interesting when you shoot uh, a shot from kind of a long distance outdoors. It's different, because you don't know if you're going to have some wind behind you or whatever. But it was a nice goal, and at the end, the celebration that he did was really good. I appreciated it.
Yeah, and, these outdoor games that they do aside from the Winter Classic are always a nice bonus,
Yeah, I wish
and
I could have stayed for him, but there were just too many days apart. If they'd have
right.
been like the next day, I'd have stayed, because I in Detroit, I saw an OHL game, an AHL game, and the Winter Classic, and that was awesome.
Yeah, that was a ton of fun, and I know, like, in Philly where they did the alumni game
Yeah,
as
that was
well,
great. That
so
was the best alumni game.
yeah. Oh, by far, by far. All right, that'll do it for today's show. We will be back again tomorrow. I am very excited. We're going to recap the game against Washington, and Russ has his first list out for the draft and rankings. So we're going to kind of go over that and see if there are any surprises, any guys we should keep an eye on based on those rankings. Always love to hear Russ's input on the prospects. And if you have mailbag questions like we answered today, you can tweet us at Locked On Flyers. You can email us at lockedonflyers@gmail. You can comment over on YouTube as well. I'm Rachel. I'm on Twitter at rmiriam. That's RMIRIAM.
I'm Russum at Sportsology, SPORTSOLOGY.
Thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen today. For your next listen, check out Locked On NHL Prospects. It's a daily show covering the next generation of hockey superstars. It's available wherever you get your podcasts. Have a great day, everyone.